Her family sold her as useless until a lonely mountain man built her a cabin and called her wife. Deadwood, Dakota Territory, summer 1876. The town stank of sweat, gun oil, and whiskey. Dust clung to every surface, settling into the lungs of the miners and gamblers who filled the streets. At the edge of the main square, in front of the rickety steps of a saloon called the Brass Mule, a transaction was about to take place, not over land or cattle, but a woman. Abigail Turner stood between her father and older brother, her chin lifted despite the humiliation swelling in her chest. She was 23, too old, according to her father, for anyone to bother marrying. Slender, with sun-browned skin and calloused hands, she looked more like a farmhand than the wife material folks whispered about. But her eyes, clear and defiant, refused to lower. Her father, Elias Turner, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, "She's no use to us. Can't land a husband, can't bring in a dowry, can't even give us a grandson. One less mouth is a blessing." Beside him, her brother Clive crossed his arms. "You'll get a good worker, long as you don't mind a sharp tongue. She's too proud for her own good." The man across from them, a red-faced saloon keeper named Horace Greevy, laughed and slapped his belly. "Don't mind at all. I'll teach her what pride's worth." He reached into his coat, pulling out a bag of coins that clinked heavily in his palm. "Here, more than she's worth, but I'm feeling generous." Abby flinched as Horace turned his gaze to her. "Get in the wagon, girl." A rough hand grabbed her arm. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She only looked at her father and saw nothing. No regret. No hesitation. Just relief. The onlookers, drunkards, prospectors, bored cowhands, jeered and hooted. "Lucky you, Horace. Bet she cleans up nice. Useless women belong in saloons or graves." Abby's jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Her heart thundered, but her spine stayed straight. Then a shadow shifted by the general store. A man had been watching, still as a tree. He wore worn buckskin, a hunting knife at his side, a satchel of tanned hide slung over one shoulder. His beard was thick, and his eyes, though half hidden beneath a weather-stained hat, saw everything. This was Wayne Boone, known only to a few as the recluse who lived alone in the mountains. Most thought he was long gone or long mad. Wayne stepped forward. The noise died. He walked past the crowd, past the spit-slick porch, and stopped beside the saloon-keeper's table. He didn't look at horses. He looked at Abby. She stared back, unsure if this was a new buyer or something worse. Without a word, Wayne let the satchel drop. The weight of it, fur, leather, the results of a long winter's hunt, thudded against the wood. Then he spoke, voice low, steady. "If she's useless to you," he said, "then I'll take her. Not to serve drinks, not to bear sons. I'll build her a roof, and if she wants, she can call it home." The silence was instant. Horace's mouth hung open. Elias sputtered. Clive stepped back like someone had just drawn a gun. "You can't just—" Horace started. "I just did." Wayne's voice was not loud, but it was firm, immovable. Abby blinked. Her legs shook. "You want her?" Horace scoffed. "She ain't worth a broken cup." Wayne glanced at the hides. "This trade's fair, more than fair." Then he looked at Abby again. This time, there was something else in his eyes. Not pity, not desire. Permission. "You can walk if you want," he said to her, quiet enough only she could hear. "But if you'd rather leave with me, I'll see to it you're never treated like property again." Abby's lip trembled. For the first time that day, she felt breath return to her chest. She nodded once. And Wayne turned, leading her away from the wagon, away from the crowd. No one stopped them, not her father, not her brother. Ah! And as the dust kicked up behind them, Deadwood watched in stunned silence, unsure what they'd just seen. A rescue or a rebellion? The trail out of Deadwood twisted like a snake into the Black Hills, each turn steeper than the last. Wayne led the way in silence, his boots steady over rocks and roots. Behind him, Abby rode atop a stubborn pack mule, her hands clutching the worn leather of the saddle. She didn't speak. Her heart pounded with every step farther from the town. Part of her still waited for the change, the shift in tone, the grab, the demand. Men were men, after all. She had learned what they meant when they offered help. But Wayne Boone remained silent. Hours passed. Trees thickened. Birdsong replaced the clang of hammers and drunken shouting. The farther they climbed, the more Abby realized how far from everything she truly was. With distance came both fear and relief, two emotions twisting like vines in her chest. At midday, Wayne stopped beside a narrow stream that gurgled through mossy rocks. He untied a tin cup from his belt, knelt, and dipped it in the water. Then he stood and handed it to her. "Drink," he said. She hesitated. He didn't push. She took the cup and sipped. The water was cold, clean, startling. Only after she drank her fill did Wayne crouch and drink directly from his hands. Not once did he look at her like a man expecting something in return. They traveled until the sun lowered behind the ridgeline. Just as Abby's muscles began to ache and the silence grew too heavy to bear, they crested a hill, and she saw it. Not a house, a clearing. A rough cabin frame stood half-finished, its roof a patchwork of canvas and pine branches. A lean-to made of logs leaned precariously beside it. Tools were stacked neatly against a stump. Smoke curled faintly from a blackened fire pit. Somewhere nearby, a single crow called, the sound sharp in the still air. Abby stared. "This is it?" Wayne nodded. He began unloading the mule. "I come here in winter. Hunt, trap, trade." She stepped closer, taking it all in. The wind whispered through the pines. It was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, but unclaimed. A space waiting to be shaped. Wayne straightened, looked at her. "I won't lie to you. This ain't comfort. Ain't safety either, not yet." He gestured toward the frame. "But there's room here for a cabin, a real one." Abby said nothing. Her eyes drifted to the makeshift shelter, the tools, the silence. Wayne continued, voice even. "You can stay tonight. If you want, we'll start building in the morning. If not, I'll take you back down at first light." She turned sharply. "Why would you give me that choice?" His brow furrowed, not in offense, but in confusion. "Because it's yours." She swallowed. "No man ever asked what I wanted. I'm not every man." The fire crackled between them as evening settled. Abby sat wrapped in one of Wayne's old coats, too large for her frame. He cooked over the flames, beans and jerky. Served her first, then sat a few paces away. He moved with quiet purpose, his back straight, his eyes never lingering too long. He did not stare, did not speak unless she did. When the stars emerged, Wayne took his bedroll and walked it out to the lean-to. "You can sleep inside," he said. "Lids patch for rain. I'll be out here." "You're not—" She caught herself. The words sounded foolish even before she said them. He didn't respond, only gave a short nod, and for the first time in years, Abigail Turner fell asleep without flinching at every sound. The days grew longer as summer stretched its limbs across the mountain. Abby rose each morning to the scent of pine and the rustle of birdsong. Her hands, once soft and idle, began to ache from new use, splitting wood, hauling stones, mixing mud. Beside her, Wayne moved with the quiet precision of someone who had learned long ago that silence carried more weight than words. They worked side by side. Wayne felled trees with practiced ease, shaping logs with the edge of his axe. Abby, under his calm instruction, learned to brace beams, pack clay between chinks, and handle a mallet without flinching. In the evenings they sat near the fire, the unfinished walls of the cabin casting long shadows behind them. One such evening, as the wind whispered through the trees and the stars blinked to life, Abby broke the silence. "Were you always up here?" she asked, staring into the flames. Wayne shook his head. "I was a carpenter, built barns, porches, coffins, had a little house near the river." She glanced sideways. "What happened?" "Took a wife. Her name was Lila. Sweet voice, loved birds. Lost her and the boy to cholera. After that, I stopped needing to hear myself talk." Abby said nothing, just let the fire fill the space between them. Then, almost unwillingly, her own voice came, soft and tight. My father said I was born wrong. Not loud enough, not pretty enough, not fertile enough. He said I'd never bring home a dowry worth remembering. Wayne stirred the fire with a stick, but didn't interrupt. I wanted to learn to read. Mama used to sneak me pages from old Bibles. But after she died, he burned my scraps. Said no man wants a wife who can outread him. Wayne looked up. Can you still read? Some words, she admitted. Not enough. Then we'll fix that too, he said simply. They lapsed into silence again, but this time it was not the silence of strangers, it was something shared, a mutual pact of understanding that didn't need to be said aloud. By the third week, the cabin's frame stood strong, a real roof stretched across beams. Abby planted wildflowers near the front, her fingers digging into the earth with unfamiliar joy. Then, one night, the rain came. Not a drizzle, but a storm that howled down the mountain like a beast. The wind tore at the canvas above the lean-to, sending water cascading through the cracks. Abby scrambled to save their dry kindling. She looked around in panic. Wayne was outside, dragging a log over the roofline. His shirt clung to his skin, his boots sunk in mud. But he kept moving. Lightning flashed. "Wayne!" she shouted. "It's flooding through!" He turned, eyes squinting through the downpour. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his thick oilskin coat and stomped through the storm to her. Without a word, he wrapped the coat around her shoulders and pulled the hood over her head. Then he turned and climbed onto the frame, hammer in hand, patching the leaks plank by plank. Abby stood in the doorway, drenched, clutching the coat tight. He didn't come down until dawn. When he did, his hands were blistered, his face streaked with mud, his clothes soaked through, and yet the first thing he said was, "Did you stay warm enough?" Abby nodded, but her lips trembled. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "I've never—" her voice cracked. "No one's ever done that for me." Wayne looked at her gently. "You shouldn't have had to wait this long." She turned away, but the tears came anyway. Not the tears of fear or shame or anger. These were different, soft, slow, unfamiliar. The kind that only come when someone finally chooses to protect you, not because they must, but because they want to. The first sign of trouble came with the distant crunch of hooves on gravel. Abby had been collecting herbs along the tree line when she froze, the sound sending a shiver down her spine. By the time she reached the cabin, Wayne was already standing on the porch, sharpening his axe with calm, deliberate strokes. Two horses approached from the ridge, ridden by men Abby knew too well. Her father, Bartholomew Turner, sat stiff-backed in his saddle, his mouth curled into a scowl. Beside him was her older brother, Roy, his eyes sharp, calculating, as if weighing how much trouble she was worth. Abby stood behind the cabin door, heart pounding. Bartholomew dismounted with a grunt. "Well, look at this dump," he sneered. "I knew she'd drag herself to dirt, but I didn't expect her to crawl up a damn mountain to do it." Wayne stepped off the porch, axe still in hand but lowered, blade resting by his leg. "You're not welcome here." Bartholomew scoffed. "She's my daughter. You think you get to say what's what? She's not your property." "Property? You're damn right she's not," Roy interjected, swinging off his horse. "She's a debt, a mouth we fed too long, and now a wealthy miner down in Helena's offering 10 head of cattle for a wife, one without a mouth on her. We're here to collect what's ours." Wayne didn't flinch. "If she wants to go with you, she can. I won't stop her." Bartholomew laughed darkly. "You think she's your wife now, huh? Think you get to play house with a girl like her?" Wayne's voice was even, unshaken. "I think she's a person. That's more than you've ever treated her as." Inside, Abby's knees trembled. She pressed a hand to the doorframe to steady herself. Her breath came in shallow pulls, but she didn't back away. Bartholomew called toward the cabin, voice dripping with false kindness. "Abigail, girl, come out. This foolishness has gone on long enough." The door creaked open. Ubby stepped out. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her hands still dirt-stained from foraging. But she stood tall, back straight, chin lifted. She looked at her father, then at her brother. "I'm not going with you," she said clearly. Bartholomew blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. Her voice didn't shake this time. "I'm not for sale. Not anymore." Roy stepped forward, but Wayne moved between them, the axe in his hand now held with purpose, not raised, but ready. "You heard her," Wayne said. "She made her choice." Bartholomew's face twisted. "You ungrateful. After all we did for you—" "You sold me," Abby interrupted. "You didn't raise me. You tolerated me. Until you could profit." Roy sneered. "You think this shack with a half-wild man is better?" Abby didn't answer that. She didn't need to. From the tree line, a few locals had gathered, trappers, traders, a widow from the valley below. They weren't close, but they were watching. Bartholomew noticed. His bravado faltered. He spat at the ground. "You'll regret this, girl." Abby stared straight at him. "Maybe, but it'll be my regret." There was a pause, long, taut, filled with dust and disbelief. Then Bartholomew turned on his heel, cursing under his breath. Roy followed, throwing one last glare at Wayne. The two men mounted up and rode off, their figures shrinking into the forest trail. Abby exhaled slowly. Her legs threatened to give, but she stayed upright. Wayne didn't speak. He simply turned, stepped up to the porch, and set the axe down at its usual place. Abby stood in the clearing a little longer, her chest rising and falling. She had chosen, and for the first time in her life, no one could take that away. The days that followed settled into a rhythm shaped by effort and silence. As the summer sun beat down over the ridge, the cabin rose slowly, log by log. Wayne's hands, weathered and steady, guided every beam into place, and Abby followed his lead, learning to mix mud for chinking, to brace rafters, to nail boards even when her arms ached. There was little conversation, but never discomfort. They worked in a quiet understanding, each moment spent not in obligation but shared purpose. Abby began to understand the language of Wayne's hands, how he pointed, paused, tilted his head in silent instruction. He never raised his voice, never sighed in impatience, and when she failed, when nails bent or boards splintered, he simply showed her again. The frame of the house took form, then the roof, and soon smoke curled gently from the stone chimney Wayne had built with painstaking care. Inside, the walls smelled of fresh-cut pine. The hearth glowed warmly at night, casting dancing shadows as they shared their quiet meals. Sometimes they would sit on the steps as the last light slipped behind the trees, neither speaking, but neither needing to. One morning, Abby planted wildflowers near the front steps, sunbursts of yellow and blue from seeds she had saved from the woods. She knelt in the dirt, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth, her fingernails packed with soil. The sun hit her cheeks, warming the places where the wind had chapped her skin. And when she stood up to admire the view, she smiled, not just out of satisfaction, but from a feeling she didn't yet have words for. It was more than accomplishment. It was the sensation of growing something that might stay. Wayne noticed later that day. He brought out a thin plank of wood, freshly sanded smooth, and set it on the table. "Time you put your name on your home," he said simply. Abby blinked. I don't know how." "I'll show you." He drew the letters slowly, ABBY. She copied him, clumsily at first. Her hands trembled, the charcoal stick smudging. But when the letters finally appeared, uneven but clear, Abby stared at them for a long time. Then she hugged the little board to her chest. It was the first thing she'd ever owned with her name on it. That evening, she cooked rabbit stew over the fire. She was still getting used to the heat of the iron pot and the angle of the hearth, and when she reached too quickly, the edge of the ladle snapped up, splashing broth across her wrist. She yelped, stumbling back. Wayne crossed the room in 2 strides. "Let me see." "It's fine," she mumbled, cradling her hand. He didn't press, just gently took her wrist, turned it palm up. The burn was red, beginning to swell. He lifted it to his mouth and blew across the skin, soft, cool breath easing the sting. Then he reached into the cabinet and took a clean strip of cloth, wrapping it around her arm with practiced care. The fabric smelled faintly of pine smoke and cedar. The whole time, he didn't say anything. Either did she. But when he tied the final knot and looked up, their eyes met. His fingers lingered a moment longer than needed. She didn't pull away. The fire crackled. Wayne cleared his throat and stepped back. Should be fine by morning. Abby nodded, but her heart was thudding strangely. She stared at the wrapped bandage, then at the man who had tied it, not with a doctor's detachment or a master's authority, but with something else, something quieter, gentler. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees. Abby turned back to the fire, stirring the stew with her left hand now. Wayne sat back in his chair, watching the flames. And though no words passed between them that night, something had shifted, like the final log set into place on a long-built cabin. The first snow came early that year, brushing the ridges in white and painting the pine needles silver. The morning Wayne left to hunt, the air was sharp, and his breath rose in puffs as he slung his rifle over his shoulder. Abby stayed behind, chopping kindling and boiling beans. She was humming softly to herself when she heard the panicked bray of the mule. She rushed outside and found Wayne stumbling up the trail, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping through his shirt. He collapsed just inside the doorway. "Wayne!" she cried, dropping beside him. "It's not deep," he grunted. "Just grazed me." But the blood wouldn't stop. Abby dragged him to the bed, stripped away his coat, and pressed a rag to the wound. He winced, but didn't protest. His face was pale, jaw clenched, tight. A deep gash ran along his ribs where the antler had struck. For days, Wayne could barely move without pain. He leaned on a carved walking stick just to reach the chair by the fire. Then Abby became the mountain. She rose before the sun, splitting wood until blisters formed on her palms. She carried buckets from the stream, one in each hand, the icy water biting her skin. She mended clothes by candlelight, cleaned the wound twice daily, and even studied the crumpled old notes Wayne had scribbled about setting traps. The villagers down below talked, as they always did. "He's dying up there, you know. That girl will be gone by spring, just watch." But Abby did not leave. She roasted rabbit she caught herself. She patched leaks in the roof during a storm. She read aloud from a worn journal Wayne had taught her to sound out, just so the cabin wouldn't fall silent. Wayne watched her from the bed, silent. He saw the way her back hunched when she lifted the axe, the way she stifled her coughs so he wouldn't worry, the way her hands trembled from exhaustion but never once refused the work. One night, during a bitter wind, she sat beside him with a needle and thread. His bandage had come loose. Her fingers were clumsy but careful, her lips pressed tight as she worked. Wayne studied her face, the determination, the fear she hid, the softness that never dulled despite all this. When she tied the last knot, her hand rested on his chest a moment longer than needed. His voice came low, rough with gratitude. "You're stronger than this whole mountain, Abby." She blinked. "What?" "I've seen storms break trees clean in half, but not you." For a second, she did not move. Then tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, not from pain, but because for the first time in her life, someone didn't call her weak or useless. He called her strong. She bowed her head, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, but Wayne only reached out, his hand closing gently over hers. No words followed. None were needed. Outside, the wind howled past the windows. But inside the cabin, the fire crackled on, steady and warm, because Abby had kept it alive. And so had something inside her. The snow began to melt as spring crept into the mountains. Tiny green shoots pushed through thawing soil, and the creek behind the cabin sang louder each morning. Wayne, though still stiff and limping, had regained some strength, enough to whittle by the fire or limp outside with a cane. One afternoon, the sound of hooves startled the birds from the trees. Abby stepped outside with a basket of pine cones and saw 3 riders making their way up the slope. They were rough men, faces wind-burned, clothes marked with dust and gold. "Name's Lyle," the tallest one said, tipping his hat. "We run a claim just south of here. Heard tell there was a woman up here who knew how to read and keep numbers straight." Abby narrowed her eyes, cautious. Lyle chuckled. "We're not here to cause trouble. Just offering something. We've got a growing operation. Need someone to keep ledgers, read freight receipts, handle orders, pays fair, roof over your head, heat, company, a real job, not whatever this is." Wayne stood behind the doorframe, silent. He didn't step forward. Abby glanced at him, then back at the men. "You offering to hire me?" "Sure are," Lyle said. "You'd be the first woman we hired for brains instead of bed warming. Town's changing. You'd have your own say." She didn't answer. The men left her a handbill and a sack of dried peaches. "Think on it," Lyle said. "Wagon rolls back through in 3 days." That evening, the cabin felt too quiet. Abby sat by the fire, the paper clutched in her hands. "A real job," she whispered. "No debts, no dependents." Wayne sat across from her, carving a piece of cedar. He hadn't said a word since the men left. Finally he got up, walked over, and placed something beside her. A small square of smooth wood, on it a hand-carved map, etched with rivers, hills, and a line leading from the cabin to the main road below. "If you want to go," he said, voice low, "this will get you there. It's the cleanest trail after snowmelt." Abby stared at the map, her throat tight. "And if I don't want to go?" "Then keep it anyway. So you always know the way back." She looked up. "Wayne, aren't you going to say something? Try to stop me?" He shook his head slowly. "You're not mine to keep. That's the whole damn point." The next 2 days passed like a quiet storm. Abby went about her tasks, baking bread, tending the stove, but every time she looked at the map, her fingers trembled. Freedom. A chance to be someone. But also, this cabin, these walls, the man who gave her space instead of chains. On the morning the wagon was due to pass, Abby stood at the edge of the trail. She held the carved map in one hand, the offer in the other. She didn't move. The wagon rumbled in the distance. She heard Lyle's voice calling out, "You ready, miss?" She turned. "No," she said. Then louder, "Steady." "No, I'm not going." Lyle blinked. "You sure?" She nodded. "Tudu doesn't live in your town. It lives in a place where I'm not called a burden, where someone sees me as worth staying for." With that, she turned and walked back to the cabin, where Wayne stood on the porch, eyes unreadable. She handed him the map. "Turns out," she said with a smile, "I already live in the place I want to find." He didn't smile back. He just nodded and stepped aside, holding the door open. Inside, the fire waited, and so did the life she had chosen, not because it was her only option, but because it was hers. Spring had come to the mountains like a soft song, buds on the trees, creeks laughing louder, and sunlight that lingered just a little longer each day. Wayne stood outside the cabin, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, hammering the last board into place on a long wooden table beneath the pines. The cabin, once only an idea sketched in his quiet heart, now stood strong and proud, with smoke curling gently from the chimney. Beside him, Abby carried a stack of hand-carved slate boards and pieces of chalk she had made from crushed limestone. She laid them carefully along the table, adjusting them until each had its place. That afternoon, the first child arrived, barefoot, freckled, carrying a basket of eggs from her mother. She came shyly, clutching her small hands together, until Abby knelt and said, "Welcome, sweetheart. You ready to learn your name?" The little girl nodded. Abby smiled and led her to the table. By the following week, there were 5 more. Mothers came up the trail, holding baskets filled with corn, cured meat, or chickens in exchange for reading lessons. The mountain cabin had become more than shelter. It was now a place of words, of warmth, and of worth. One evening, as fireflies danced near the porch, Wayne sat whittling a new stool for the children. Abby came out in her simple cotton dress, her hair braided with a strip of white lace. "Tomorrow's Sunday," she said quietly. Wayne nodded. "Suppose it is." She took a slow breath. "And I was thinking, might be time we did something about that." He looked up, confused. "About Sunday?" "No," she said with a soft laugh. "About us." He stared at her, then smiled slowly. The next morning, under the tallest pine behind the cabin, the wedding took place. Abby wore a white dress stitched from flour sacks. The children had picked wildflowers and scattered them at her feet. One of the mothers had baked a berry pie. Another played a tune on a broken fiddle. Wayne wore a clean shirt, and for the first time in years, he'd trimmed his beard. When they stood beneath the tree, Abby looked out at the small gathering. Children she had taught, women who had once pitied her and now looked at her with respect. And Wayne, the man who never asked her to change, only offered her a place to become. She took his hands. "I used to think my value came from what I could give others," she said, voice clear and strong. "And when I couldn't give what they wanted, I was cast aside, sold, forgotten. But this man, this quiet, stubborn mountain man, he built me more than a cabin. He built me a life, a place, a name." She paused, tears brimming. "And today, I stand here not because someone claimed me, but because I chose him." Wayne cleared his throat, visibly moved. "I've built a lot in my time," he said slowly, "but nothing ever felt finished. Until her. She came up this mountain with nothing and somehow turned it into everything. A man with 2 feet, he thought, could doubt. Today I call her my wife, not because I own her, but because there ain't a word more fitting for the woman who made this place a home." The children clapped, someone cried, someone laughed. When Wayne slipped the wooden ring, hand-carved from pine, onto Abby's finger, the forest seemed to hush in reverence. That night, the cabin glowed from within. Children sat at the table, whispering their alphabet. Chickens clucked softly beneath the porch. Wayne carved a new shelf by the hearth, while Abby wrote lesson plans by candlelight. Outside, the stars burned bright. Inside, Abby smiled, because after a life spent being told she was nothing, she now stood at the center of something that mattered. Not because she was wanted, but because she was needed, because she belonged. Thank you for watching. Her family sold her, as useless until a lonely mountain man built her a cabin and called her wife. If this story stirred your heart or brought a smile to your face, be sure to hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more powerful, tender tales from the untamed frontier. We've got many more stories coming about women once discarded who found not just love, but respect in the most unexpected places. See you in the next story.